All right, so remember that y equals the inverse sine of x means that x is equal to sine of y. So notice here where we had x and y, when we use the inverse of the inverse is the original, okay? When we use the inverse there, the x and y switched. And we're actually going to do that when we go to work these. We're going to switch them because that's the way we're used to seeing it. All right, where our x is going to be between -1 and 1, and our y's are between -pi over 2 and positive pi over 2. Use this information to find the exact values of the following problems. Well, first thing is, before we actually do this also, let's go ahead and let's identify, where is -pi over 2?
On that side, like the first little dash thing.
No. It's down here at the bottom.
Oh, how come it's...
Because remember, negative means we're going to go clockwise. Pi over 2 is the same as 90 degrees,
I
okay?
you meant, like on a graph like this.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. I'm sorry. So,
like on your circle.
like
that's what.
yeah, she's talking about on the circle.
That's what she's talking about. Not like an actual graph.
All right, where is positive pi over 2?
At the top.
Yeah, it's going to be up here on the top, okay? So if I'm looking between -pi over 2, that's where I'm going to start at, to positive pi over 2, I'm looking in what quadrants?
1 and 4.
Quadrants 1 and 4. So when we go to solve anything using the inverse sign, we only look in quadrants 1 and 4 to get our answers. 2 and 3 don't matter for inverse sign. All right, so let's go over here to A. A says we're going to find the inverse sign of 1. Well, usually they want us to put it equals y, because if you see up at the top, that's how they have it written. But anytime we use the inverse, guys, we're looking for an angle. So I'm actually going to use my theta symbol. And my angle, though, has to be between -pi over 2 and positive pi over 2. So we've got these two here. This is my x and y. And so we're used to using sine. So let's go ahead and let's just switch them. So let's do the inverse. So this means the same thing as sine of theta is equal to 1. And I need to know what angle is sine of theta equal to 1 at. Or what angle is sine going to be 1? Well, we know it's going to be in quadrants 1 or 4. Or it could be one of the quadrantal angles there. Sine on my unit circle is what? X or Y? Got to think back, huh? It's my Y value. So go to your unit circle in quadrants 1 and 4 and find which of these has my Y value is that 1. Okay. But we want it in radians because it says it has to be between -pi over 2 and positive pi over 2. So what is it?
Pi over 2.
Yeah, pi over 2. All right, so let's go ahead and look at C. So it's the inverse sign, so I know that means we're looking for our angle. So when I do the inverse of it, that means sine of what angle will equal the square root of 2 over 2? Well, because we're dealing with the inverse sign, remember we're only looking in quadrants 1 and 4. Sine is what value, x or y, on my unit circle?
Y.
So look for the y value that is the square root of 2 over 2 and tell me what angle is that at.
45.
But I need it in radians. Pi over 4. And that angle is between -pi over 2 and positive pi over 2.
Okay, let's try to do one of them by ourselves.
Well, we kind of change gears a little bit.
Dang it.
I know. So let's look at B. Same thing. It says the inverse sign of -1/2, and we know we're looking for our angle. So let's switch it up. So sine of what angle equals -1/2? All right, so we're going to go to our unit circle. We're going to look for where our y value is -1/2, and it does tell me 11 pi over 6, but don't box this. The reason is our angle, you're at the right location right there, but our angle has to be between -pi over 2 and positive pi over 2. 11 pi over 6 is too big. So, and that has to do with because when we're doing those quadrant 4 angles, we're going clockwise, which means our angles are going to be negative, okay? So I need a coterminal angle for 11 pi over 6.
Negative pi over 6.
So she's right. So we get negative pi over 6. Now how could you get that?
Magic.
No, not magic.
I don't
You could
know.
have subtracted 2 pi.
I could have subtracted 2 pi. So if I did 11 pi over 6 minus 2 pi, it's going to give me negative pi over 6. I could have also, do you remember when we built our unit circle, how we used those little triangles and we reflected it across the x and the y? And we just kept going round and round? You remember how I told you we ought to color code those? Well, if you color coded them, if you look up here and, well, actually if you look, look down here where it says 11 pi over 6. Do you see what color yours is in? Everybody's going to be different. So if you look in quadrant 1, that tells you what its reference angle is, which would have been pi over 6. Uh-oh, that's really hard to read. But let me go back here.
So that goes for every single thing?
So, but because we reflected it across the x-axis, we went down, we went clockwise, we went negative, which meant this is also a negative pi over 6. All right, so let's look at D. Now it says estimate. So this means it's probably not on my unit circle, ladies.
Oh.
So we're going to find the inverse sine of 1/3. Well, we know this is our angle, which means that sine of what angle will equal 1/3? Well, we can get an estimation looking at our unit circle because you're looking for where y is 1/3. Well, do you see where it says where you have pi over 6? It says that ordered pair is square root of 3 over 2, comma 1/2. And so its y value is 1/2. I picked that one because it's the smallest one in quadrant 1, which means 1/3 is smaller than 1/2, isn't it? So my angle is going to be smaller than pi over 6. So we could say that our angle is approximately maybe pi over 9, pi over 8, pi over 9, pi over 10. We're not real sure. It said to estimate it. But I can find out for sure what it is using my calculator. So in our calculator, excuse me, we're going to type in, don't do it yet, the inverse sine of 1/3. Now, how do you get to the inverse sine?
Second sine?
Second sine. You're allowed to hit that now. But you're going to hit the sine button, aren't you?
Yeah.
And remember a while back, if you touch the sine button on your calculator, you have to check the mode. What mode do we need to be in? Radians. So make sure you're in radian mode and then type in the inverse sine of 1/3 equals, or enter. I'm going to take it to 4 decimal places because it doesn't round nicely at 3.
Anyone?
0.3, 3.
3.
Anybody want to help me here?
9.3398.
Okay,
If you trust me.
All right.
I do.
And then math and nerd.